Welcome everyone to Kent County Levy Court combined business and committee meetings for this evening, Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. We're in Levy Court Chambers, room 203 at 555 Bay Road, Dover, Delaware. Before we start the business meeting, I'll turn the microphone over to the county administrator to explain how it works on the phone and WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, everyone. This meeting is being offered in person at 555 Bay Road in Dover, Delaware. It is an official proceeding of the Levy Court, and as such, we will be following the adopted rules of procedure that Levy Court has put in place, as well as the Mason's Rules of Order for this meeting. This meeting is also being offered to guests via WebEx who are joining us remotely. And for those participants, there will be opportunity throughout the meeting for public comment. And at those junctures in the meeting, we will receive public comment from those folks present in the room first, and then we will invite guests who are joining us via WebEx for comments. And if it's during a public hearing, everyone who's making public comments will need to precede their comments by stating their full name and address and being sworn in by the county attorney prior to making their remarks. Also, for those folks who are joining us via WebEx, if you're on a mobile phone, we ask that you keep it on mute, and at the appropriate time, *3 will raise your electronic hand. Our operator will be able to see you and release you to join us into the meeting. For those who are on a computer, the raise hand icon on the screen will do the same thing. You select that and it'll raise your hand, and we will be able to enter you into the virtual room here for your comments. We'll remind you throughout the course of the meeting at those points where we're requesting comments from our virtual joiners to the meeting. And this meeting is being recorded, so we ask that everyone speak clearly, use a microphone, state your name for the record, so that we'll be able to identify you later as we're preparing minutes of this proceeding. Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. Before we start, when you came in, on both doors is posted no hats, no cell phones, and no eating. So please abide by those rules. Thank you. At this time, we'll call the business meeting to order. I'll ask Commissioner Howe for the invocation, Commissioner Maston for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Sweeney to offer a moment of silence for our troops and first responders. All rise.
Heavenly Father, we do recognize your presence tonight, and we ask that you guide us in all of our deliberations so that they're pleasing to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence to honor our military, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, and other first responders who have lost their lives in the line of duty protecting and fighting for our freedoms. We also honor all first responders and medical staff who have succumbed to COVID-19 virus complications contracted through close interaction with infected patients, losing their lives caring for others. As of today, more than 868,000 Americans nationwide, 2,480 in Delaware, and 537 right here in Kent County have lost their lives to COVID. Please remember all of these individuals who died in the line of duty, as well as keeping their families in your thoughts and prayers as they deal with the loss of their loved ones. Police Officer Fernando Arroyas from the Los Angeles Police Department, California. Police Officer Diane Gonzalez from the New Haven Police Department, Connecticut. Police Officer Kirill Jones from the Memphis Police Department, Tennessee. Police Officer Tyler Lenahan from the Elk Grove Police Department, California. School Resource Officer Johnny Patterson from the Lee County School District Police Department in Mississippi. Police Officer Jason Rivera from the New York Police Department. Special Agent Anthony Salas from the Texas Department of Public Safety. Corporal Charles Galloway from the Harris County Constable's Office in Texas, and Sergeant Ramon Gutierrez from the Harris County Sheriff's Office in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sweeney. Mr. Tanaka, can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Angel,
Present.
Mr. Buxton,
Present.
Mr. Hall,
Here.
Mr. Howell,
Here.
Mrs. Maston,
Present.
Mr. Sweeney,
Here.
Mr. Pepper.
Here.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 present.
Thank you. All 7 commissioners are present. Need a motion on the adoption of this evening's agenda.
So moved, Mr. President.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Angel, second by Commissioner Sweeney. Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Angel,
Yes.
Mr. Buxton, Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Howell,
Yes.
Mrs. Maston,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney.
Yes.
Mr. Pepper.
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. This evening's agenda has been adopted. Need a motion on the consent agenda 22-01.
So moved, Mr. President.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Angel, second by Commissioner Howe. Can we have a roll call on that, please?
Mr. Angel,
Yes.
Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Howell,
Here. Yes.
Mrs. Maston,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mr. Pepper.
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Consent agenda 22-01 has been approved. The first item on the agenda tonight are 2 presentations. First one is Employee of the Month for February. Mr. Knockham, can we have you read that, please?
Kent County Department heads have selected Brian S. Reed from the Planning Services Department as the February 2022 Employee of the Month. Brian currently serves as a Building Codes Inspector 2 in the Inspection and Enforcement Office and started his Kent County career as a Building Codes Inspector 1 in September 2018. He came to the county with a variety of skills such as a maintenance mechanic, plant maintenance foreman, and carpenter. His primary duties include performing complex inspections of buildings in the course of construction for code compliance, code enforcement, preparation of reports, and maintenance of inspection record. Recently, Brian has been working with a senior citizen living in an unsafe house that had to be condemned. The resident had been renting the house until the owner passed away and had no alternative housing. Brian worked with every outside resource and agency available to help the individual find safe and secure housing, then took it upon himself to bring him groceries so he had enough to eat, and even delivered him gifts for Christmas. According to Planning Services Director Sarah Kiefer, Brian has consistently been an effective enforcement officer. More importantly, he has demonstrated remarkable empathy for the people we serve. That empathy is just as often for the people we have to put in violation as it is for the complainants. I would suggest that this sort of kindness sets the standard for service to our community. Congratulations, Brian, on a job well done, and he resides in Commissioner Howell's and Commissioner Pepper's districts. And the tribute reads, Kent County Levy Court, February 2022 Employee of the Month, Brian S. Reed. On this, the 25th day of January 2022, the Levy Court of Kent County, State of Delaware, does hereby recognize Brian S. Reed, Building Codes Inspector 2, Department of Planning Services, Inspection and Enforcement Office, for his exceptional initiative, dedication, and conscientiousness in the delivery of services to the citizenry of the county.
Thank you. I think Brian's here. Yes. Not real sure with all these masks on back there. It's kind of hard to tell who's out there. But Brian, if you come forward, we'll come down and meet you. Good job, buddy.
Thank you,
Good
sir.
job.
Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, Brian, thank you for all that you do for King County, representing the county. You've got a tough job. You deal with people that are not always happy to see you, and but in the end, you're doing what's best for the county and the general public. So we certainly do appreciate you for all the hard work and everything that you do for the county. So, of course, this is for, what is this, for February's? Already? Oh my gosh, that's hard to believe. Gee, 1 month almost gone already. But congratulations. I'll let the other commissioners have an opportunity.
Yes, congratulations. You do have a hard job. And if you ever decide to run for commissioner, you know exactly how we feel too sometimes. So congratulations.
Having only been here, this is my first full year. I have to say I've had a lot of opportunities for you, and you have done so well resolving them all. You've made my life easy, and even the people you've cited have been so pleased and tell me what a professional individual you are. So congratulations on a job well done.
Great work. Call me tomorrow. I need you. Really great job. They're proud of you.
Brian, congratulations not only for the job that you do here, but for how you give back to the community. I think that was a great story concerning the people that you've helped. Congratulations, well deserved.
I agree. Your excellence in performance has been recognized, and we're glad you're with us. Stay with us another 50 years. That's all we ask.
Congratulations, Brian. I knew it'd only be a matter of time. And, the work that you do for that elderly gentleman, outstanding. It's really represents the very best of what the county does, and I appreciate you doing that. So congratulations again.
Brian, outstanding work. You're being recognized by your peers, and that's a really high honor, and it's great to see so many of your colleagues that you work with every day here tonight. Keep up the wonderful work. As Sarah Kiefer mentioned in the tribute, you're doing outstanding customer service, and you're going above and beyond. So congratulations on this honor, and good luck in December for the Employee of the Year.
Brian, if you want to come on over here, we'll get a couple pictures. Kelly, take some pictures.
No, Eric, the other way.
Sarah, would like to come up and say anything?
Thank you. I would simply say that this is the most recent example of Brian going above and beyond. It's something he does routinely. Brian epitomizes what it means to be a public servant, and I am both very proud and very grateful he's part of our team. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You want to say something? Sure. And we might as well step here, Mr. Quayle, if you want to come forward, please, and tell us about the perfect attendance for last year.
Mr. President, Commissioners, as always, it's an honor to appear before you tonight. It's been over 25 years we've been recognizing our employees with perfect attendance certificates just like this, over 25 years. In fact, I came across one, my own, from 25 years ago, signed by President Terry Pepper that long ago, and that's something. But we do have about a dozen, it looks like, employees here representing the 57 that achieved 56 who achieved perfect attendance during calendar year 2021. And what they're going to do is they're going to come up here and get a certificate, be greeted by you, and then the county administrator is going to give them a gift, a token of the county's appreciation. Okay?
Are we only going to call up the ones that are here?
Yes, right.
Are we going to recognize the rest of them? Or?
I'm not sure if it can get pulled up on the screen, but I'm going to talk about how many are in each one. It's 57 names. You probably don't want to hear all of them, but I will certainly say how each department did. So for the Sheriff's Department, we're going to do it in reverse alphabetical order by department. So just so that it doesn't start with administration. We're going to start with the Sheriff's Office, and I know we had somebody who suggested they might be able to be here. I don't see her. So then we'll move on to the Public Works Department, and no one is here. And Public Safety. It looks like we have Katie Ridgway in the audience. She's a dispatcher in the Department of Public Safety. Katie, come on down. Go up and see commissioners.
Thank you for getting up every day and coming to work.
We do, Katie.
And we have Chief Colin Faulkner, a perennial perfect attendant. I don't believe there's anybody else here from Public Safety. As President Pepper said, it's hard to recognize folks in masks. There were 11 employees in the public safety have perfect attendance, quite an achievement during COVID. In the Planning Services Department, Colin, going to stay up there. In the Planning Services Department, I think I see Jamie Finsky. Yes, she come on down. We had 10 employees in planning services achieve perfect attendance. Good, Jamie.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jill Johns, also a regular honoree of perfect attendance.
Been around a long time, haven't you?
And next we have Shannon Morse. So we did invite all 56 of the employees to appear tonight and heard from many of them. There you go. Mm-hmm.
Crash.
And Nancy Thompson, also from Planning Services. And I think that is everyone who had perfect attendance in Planning Services. Okay.
Great job.
Thanks.
Good job.
Next, we'll move to the Finance Department, which had 5 employees achieve perfect attendance, and we'll start with Paula Cole. And next is Lisa Cooper.
Thank you.
And we have Paula McPhail. And I believe that's everyone from the finance department. Wave your hand if I missed you. Okay.
Thank you.
In the community services department, we had 5 employees achieve perfect attendance, and representing that department tonight's Hillary Welliver. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Way to go, Doctor.
From the administration department, we had 7 employees achieve perfect attendance, and first up is Barbara Gibbs.
Thank you.
Next up is Lori Tanaka.
Thank you, Lori.
And before I go to the last 2, I just want to make sure I haven't missed anybody. When you wear a mask, I can't recognize you as well. Okay. So also another person who perennially gets perfect attendance, the county administrator, Mike Pedamage. And last but not least, it would be me. So.
Thank you, Alan.
How you want that, Kelly?
I feel like I'm taller than the straddle.
How are you, Jamie?
Good, how are you? Sorry.
Short people up
Keep your
front,
hands
buddy.
yourself here. Keep Alan's scooter away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need anything with little wheels on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody smile. Just get the number. Yeah, got glare on there. Didn't you see there?
Everyone that's here for the meeting tonight, thank you for indulging us on that. We'd like to take every opportunity we can to recognize our employees for the outstanding work that they do. Thank you again. Okay, at this time, we'll open our public hearings for this evening. First item on the agenda is Stormwater Maintenance District Extension Resolution. Mr. Buxton, Resolution 3908.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe that Ms. Kiefer's here along with Jumpin' Jared Atkins.
Good evening, Commissioners. Resolution 3908 extends the Stormwater Maintenance District to the Champions Club subdivision. A majority of the lot owners have signed the petition in the affirmative, and we've confirmed those. The operation and maintenance plan has been finalized. It should be noted that the district will not be responsible for maintenance immediately. The community is still being finalized. So we'll take on maintenance responsibility as soon as KCD signs off on all of the stormwater infrastructure. The annual maintenance fee has been established at $28 per parcel per year. It meets all of the qualifications for joining the district. Staff would recommend it be approved. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So this is, you got this, right?
All right, this is a public hearing, so anyone who came here to testify in favor of this resolution, 3908, now has the opportunity to come forward and tell us why. Anybody would like to come forward?
We have any guests on WebEx who wish to address Levy Court in favor of this proposal? Press star 3 on your mobile phone or the raise hand icon on your computer.
I see no hands raised online.
All right, this time, anybody in the audience that is opposed to Resolution 3908, please come forward. Anyone in the audience opposed, please come forward.
Similarly, if we have anyone online who wishes to address Levy Court in opposition to Ordinance 21-12, star 3 on your mobile phone or the raise hand icon on your computer.
No takers online at this time.
Okay. No takers, no one for or against come forward. This time we'll close the public hearing, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Buxton for a motion.
My pleasure. Resolution 3908, Champions Club at Jonathan's Landing Stormwater Maintenance District. Based on it's adequate and appropriate. The property owners are in support of it. It's in the best public interest. It's a good program. So based on those comments, a motion is to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Buxton, second by Commissioner Sweeney. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Knockoff, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes, reasons stated by Commissioner Buxton.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes, for reasons stated.
Mr. Hall?
Yes, for reasons stated.
Mr. Howell,
Yes, reasons stated.
Mrs. Maston,
Yes, reason stated.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes, for all reasons stated.
Mr. Pepper,
Yes, for all reasons stated, it is a great program, and it'll save the residents there a lot of anguish in the future. So, thank you.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. 7 yeas, reveals Resolution 3908 has been approved. Thank you, folks, for coming out. Appreciate it. Okay, the next ordinance is regarding a reapportionment of Levy Court districts revised. Mr. Angel, ordinance LC 22-02.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Fedemaj, the tweaking of our boundaries.
Thank you, Commissioner Angel. Before we open the public hearing on this ordinance LC 22-02, just a brief explanation. You'll recall that on November 16th of 2021, Levy Court adopted ordinance 21-12, which was the reapportionment map and ordinance for our new district maps based on the 2020 population census. Since that time, the Department of Elections has reviewed our final map, and they have requested a few minor alterations to align our boundaries with specific boundaries that they've established for a representative and senatorial district boundaries, and also to assist them in consolidating polling places in a few locations. These proposed revisions were reviewed by Levy Court on the 11th of January in committee, and met with your concurrence. And that same evening, this ordinance LC 22-12 was introduced for public hearing this evening. I'm prepared, as you see on the screen, to kind of review the proposed revisions if anyone wishes for me to do so. The ultimate documents, the ordinance, Exhibit A, which is the narrative of each of the districts, and Exhibit B, which is the actual map of each of the districts, has been provided to you in your packet. Also, Mr. Michael Ward is with us this evening in the audience, and Mr. Ward was our GIS consultant on this project and assisted with both the map preparation and the legal description preparation for the ordinance. Mr. Chairman, I turn the floor back to Commissioner Angel for the public hearing.
Mr. President, back to you, sir, for public open.
Thank you. This is a public hearing on ordinance LC 22-02. At this time, I ask anyone in the audience that is in favor of this ordinance to please come forward and give testimony as to why it should be passed by Levy Court. Anyone in the audience in favor?
If we have anyone online who wishes to address Levy Court in favor of LC 22-02, press star 3 on your mobile phone or the raise hand icon on your computer.
I see no hands raised on WebEx at this time.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience that is opposed to ordinance LC 22-02, now is your opportunity to come forward and offer testimony as to why you're against it. Anyone opposed?
Similarly, if we have anyone on WebEx who wishes to address Levy Court in opposition to LC 22-02, star 3 on your mobile phone or the raise hand icon will bring you into the room.
No one online at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no one opposed, Commissioner Angel, I'll turn it back to you for a motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to approve LC 22-02, an ordinance repealing ordinance 21-12, reapportionment of Levy Court districts, and ordinance repealing ordinance 11-20, and replacing those provisions by adopting the district boundaries proposed by the Redistricting Commission of Kent County, Delaware, with regard to reapportionment of the Levy Court districts and readopting the district boundaries and amendments requested by Kent County Department of Elections.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Angel, second by Commissioner Maston to approve LC 22-02 ordinance. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes, as per my motion.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes, reason stated.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals ordinance LC 22-02 has been approved by Levy Court. At this time, we'll close public hearings and recess to committee meeting. First, committee meeting, Administration Committee, Mr. Angel, Chair. Turn to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Petimaj?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You received in your packet this weekend a professional services contract that was prepared by Tetra Tech Incorporated. The selected respondent, we issued an RFP this past fall, as you know, and on the 21st of December, Levy Court voted to select Tetra Tech for negotiation of a contract. What was sent to you this weekend was a copy of a professional services contract and the actual proposal that was submitted as part of it. It becomes part and parcel of the contract as an attachment, and that was included in your packet. We have a motion for your consideration if you're ready to engage Tetra Tech Incorporated. We've provided a motion that will accomplish that and would enable the President of Levy Court to execute the agreement on behalf of Levy Court. This evening, we are very pleased to have with us Gina Benfeld from the Tetra Tech organization. We've been working with Gina for the past at least month and a half on the details of this proposal. Gina is the project manager if you do enter this engagement. And I believe she also has a few of her team members present with her as well tonight in the audience. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Gina. She has a presentation to provide to you, a little bit about her organization and also the services they will provide under this engagement. Gina, welcome.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. It's a wonderful opportunity to be before you tonight and to work on behalf of Kent County on this important federal funding. It's considerable. It's got some ins and outs, and we are delighted to help guide through this. Thank you. Technology. What I'd like to do tonight is introduce our team members, talk briefly about the scope of services, the work that we'll be performing for you, and then a few items regarding the contract itself. So I am Gina Bainfeld, your project manager. I am with Tetra Tech. We are the lead organization in this team of 6, and we're really proud of the folks who have joined our team. I'll go through in a second. Tetra Tech, you may know us as a civil engineering and water infrastructure company, but we do many things, inclusive of federal funding, administration. We are involved in compliance and administration, in disaster management, water infrastructure, resource management. And we have the distinction of being the nation's largest provider of emergency management consulting and planning services to state and local and county level clients. And that includes COVID-19 pandemic response and recovery. We have a significant commitment to the state of Delaware. Many projects here within the state, an office of approximately 100 or more in Newark, multiple water infrastructure, school, environmental work within the state for DENREC, DELDOT, and others, and several here within the county. We're a considerable organization, 20,000 employees, 450 offices worldwide, but we really take quite seriously a commitment to provide local responsive services to our clients. That is Tetra Tech. I'm going to try this again if it does not. There we go. Finally with the clicker. One of our other important team members is Baker Donaldson. Baker Donaldson is a law firm. They are a specialized firm focusing on disaster recovery, administrative, and regulatory law. They have extensive, deep experience in Federal Emergency Management Agency, Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR, CARES Act, and ARPA. They have been leaders in this space since the get-go of CARES Act and ARPA, and also approach their work from a real 2020 perspective, a hindsight perspective. This law firm, when communities do get in a bind, and it does happen, and they need to go before a federal agency like HUD or FEMA to defend the expenditures that they've made, this is the law firm that's the go-to. So the compliance experience within this team is not only experience in having done it, but also having defended it, which is real important. Let's see again. Other team members, real important to our team. CSA Consulting is more substance to the Tetra Tech team in the way of grant management, project delivery, grant development work. They've done extensive, each of the team members has done in the billions of dollars of federal management, federal funding management, but in particular CSA in housing, infrastructure, and community resilience with about $40 million in COVID recovery grants currently in process. The partnering team member, TMG Consulting, an accounting firm specialized in disaster recovery, audit, forensic accounting, program and grant management, document management, and these are experts in closeout. So, you're at the beginning of your grant administration. You want sound financial management throughout. Of course, you will receive that through the county staff, but this will be augmented by this accounting firm. And when the funds are expended, it is important to set the files in proper order, and these folks do this very well. They're experts in FEMA related to this. And then here tonight with me is Jerry Esposito and John Parody, Espo Enterprises, providing advisory services for clients specializing in government and public affairs, and in particular water resource management, and Baird Mandalis Brockstead through John, specializing in land use zoning, real estate, construction, and environmental law. So these two gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight, offer real local intelligence to inform even further this team. Tetra Tech's experience in the state is good. These gentlemen have been steeped in Kent County for decades. Why a firm specializing in real estate and land use is that there are components that could be capital projects, and John's expertise in this area can be very helpful to us. So, on to scope. What are we going to do? First off, we've been asked to make a presentation back to you, a little deeper dive on the ARPA funding, the state and local financial recovery funding. I know you all have studied up a bit, but this will be an opportunity to kind of go through the main four buckets, understand limitations, understand permissibility, some of the compliance aspects, and kind of give you a good foundation or even better foundation than you have. So that'll be a great time to ask some further questions. We, in the interest of time, are going to take kind of two-prong approach. One of the strong emphasis of this team, and as it should be for any consulting team in federal funding management that's worth their salt, ought to be, is on compliance, making sure that a proper attention is paid at the outset to set up files, to set up compliance documents, to review existing procurement policies, set up those procedures. It just is the good homework that should be done that sets you up for success in administering these funds. They're considerable at $35 million plus, and that homework is important. So we would engage in those activities. I'll talk in a second a little bit more about that. The other prong that we will pursue right up, really as in the interest of time, is a healthy planning process. So the federal funding, when you are an even larger recipient of funds than this county, actually requires a plan to be conducted. This funding has running through it a couple of themes that are important to pay attention to. That is community involvement, communication, as well as inclusion and consideration of vulnerable populations. So one great way to do that is to engage in a planning process. I'll talk in a second a little bit more about what's planned for that. But these are important components and important to pay attention to for this particular funding source. So, on to that compliance. Just a little further, we'll take a look at the documentation framework, when the planning process is completed, when the projects start coming in, when the applications start coming in, making sure that all is set up well, organized, accessible, retrievable documentation for those decisions. Accounting, the county is excellent in its accounting systems. We would take a look to ensure that with the volume and the smaller amounts that could be coming, that all is set up well and again retrievable, reportable within the structure of the federal funding and for these segregated dollars. Documents review, I've kind of already said, but real important here on those compliance, those procurement additions that are needed for federal funding, for conflicts of interest, policies and procedures, these kinds of documents that we would review where existing, recommend additions where needed, and write anew where needed. In all of the analysis that we would do, we'd provide a compliance review memo that's summarized and then get to work on those things. And if the county desired, we'd provide a procurement toolkit that would be compliant for federal procurement rules. And our favorite chapter and verse to quote is 2 CFR 200. You too will come to love this. It's the guidance that the federal government uses for many of its federal funding sources, and it applies here. It has procurement requirements, which have a few ins and outs that are important to pay attention to. With regard to the planning process, again, that sort of outreach to the community always helps to get feedback where the pain points still are. Recommendations on programs, ways to spend funds, always helpful to get the insight from people who are living it and people who are working it. So we have kind of this will operate kind of as 2 tiers, but it's here left to right. We'll start with 2 public meetings. These are open public forums. We'll do an overview of the legislation, the program, the funding, the major buckets. and have a dialogue session to pull out where those pain points still are and suggestions on programs. Nonprofits will be a part, and then using that feedback, work with a group of stakeholders here listed on the page. The Chamber, Urological, Healthcare, Emergency Response, including daycares. That's another important result that's kind of come from the pandemic. Public Works for Infrastructure, and the Greater Kent Committee and Kent Economic Partnership. These are suggested. They're not written in stone. This is just where our thinking was. We will certainly vet that with the county before proceeding. We will conduct demographic and appropriate research to support the plan as well. Basically, this is your plan. We will come back to the court to report on findings from that research and from that public input. And then with your feedback and input, get to writing out the plan. And that plan will document the process that was used, engagement, visioning, information and findings, as well as those recommendations and implementation actions. That again will come back to the court here for approval. That will be your guiding document for your investments utilizing your SLFRF funding. And intended to be a transparent kind of document, accessible in that vein of transparency and sunshine that runs through this legislation. We'll work with you to post this on your website and make some other additions there too, as is comfortable. So that will be the strategic planning process, and then right away get to work on implementation. And we've already started some work in this vein, but in earnest, there are kind of two major areas where implementation activities will occur. One is where there may be construction projects where there's a water infrastructure or broadband or other government services kind of infrastructure project or capital project. And that's around the procurement, the expenditure of funds, making sure that the project is progressing according to contract and according to spending recommendations. The other is programmatic. And that can be expenditures made by the county or by a program you may wish to set up. A program that would have multiple recipients, multiple applicants. It could be to nonprofits, homeowners, renters. It could be to businesses. It could be a variety of things. And those are the kinds of staff-intensive activities that would help you manage and be the legs to manage multiple applicants, communication around the program, serving as the point of contact, and processing, documenting, and recommending for approval multiple applicants. And one best practice that we've found in administering those kinds of projects and those kinds of programs is kind of get a focus group together before the program is launched of the people or the organizations or businesses that are going to be a beneficiary of that program. And simply provide as draft, here's the program. What do you think? Any sticking points? Any things we're asking for that really cause you trouble that maybe we can adjust? And that ability to have that conversation is tremendous buy-in. It helps programs operate a whole lot better and helps a sort of sense of listening and responding, which is can be really, really helpful. In the case where these are recipients receiving funds, in some cases they may be large enough where those recipients are going to be kind of taking on the role of administering. We call these sub-recipients. In those cases, they have to be reminded of the obligations, the compliance components, their documentation, their reporting requirements. So we'll provide trainings where that's relevant as well. I'm not going to read through this whole slide here, so don't worry. But real important here are some of the top level components. Throughout the administration, there needs to be very strong, robust compliance protocols that address project and decision documentation, as I've mentioned before, procurement, accounting, and such. Compliance schedules, these get memorialized in agreements and get adhered to in reporting, and then monitoring, actually going to some of those subrecipient sites. Outcomes tracking. Yes,
Gina, Commissioner Sweeney has a question for you.
I mean, while you're on the subject of subrecipients, who would be responsible for making sure that either the direct recipients or the subrecipients are not double dipping?
That's the county's responsibility in the approval process, and we would help guide you through that.
So we would be responsible to make sure someone we're giving funds to is not also getting funds from another municipality for the same thing?
Correct. That's called duplication of benefits.
Okay.
And there needs to be a robust check of multiple sources. So a lot of times this comes into play in disasters cases in insurance. Right. You know, like an insurance company will pay for something and then there'll be an application also to a public entity. And those kinds of checks are essential. So where there may be a municipality that also could be contributing to a project, those checks would need to be made to ensure that there's no duplication, there's no double dipping. I don't want to get too detailed, but you can also incorporate terms within the agreement. So as the county received an agreement between the federal U.S. Treasury and the county for receipt of these funds, it passes most of those responsibilities to these subrecipients. And you can place on those subrecipients a requirement that if there is a duplication, that funding is paid back. So yes, there is a very robust system that will be put in place there.
So when you say the county, do you mean Tetra Tech by extension because you
bet.
Correct?
You bet.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
That's our job. Other subrecipient monitoring, this would be, this is choosing files, going in, reviewing the documentation, making sure that disability is monitored, where applicable, labor compliance is adhered to, the record keeping is in good shape. No one likes to talk about the audit, but the likelihood that audit will come is not just 50-50. It's probably greater than that. You set up a program with the expectation that an audit may occur. And so all of these homework items and making sure that documentation is correct and well accounted for and accessible, easily retrievable, organized, sets you up very well for those kinds of activities that may and likely may come from U.S. Treasury. Our favorite reporting, there's a lot of words here on the page. These are really some high-level components of the reporting framework. Right now, you're in obligation stage, so your reporting is not super sophisticated, not very complex. But as you begin to expend and you're providing project expenditure information, these reports come into importance, and the narrative around them and the subawards, et cetera, become very important. So we'll be supporting you on those where we're preparing them. They will be professionally written, as graphically pleasing as can be within the federal reporting framework, but we'll try. And as well on projects, expenditures, demographic distribution, how these funds are being distributed to those vulnerable populations or how they're being impacted and affected and benefited. Those subawards, those subrecipients, there's a whole civil rights compliance, which is more familiarly known as equal opportunity, and then your non-construction and construction or infrastructure, non-infrastructure reporting. So it gets to be fun, and those obligations as subrecipients are provided funding, those obligations flow down to them, back up to the counties so that all the right information can be provided on time. Your quarterly and annual reports, and those will be taken very seriously. Okay. I thought we'd give a few high-level thoughts on the contract itself, and if there are any questions, of course, pipe up. Our terms within the contract, just real high level, we used a Tetra Tech standard form of contract, so it looks probably a little more engineering and construction oriented than perhaps you might have expected. But it's a standard that we use across just about all our disciplines. The type of contract, and this is actually a federal compliance component, is time and materials, and it's got to have a not to exceed amount. Time and materials means you're paying hour by hour and expense by expense, not that we expect a whole lot of additional expenses. For the services provided. This is different from what is known as a fixed price or perhaps lump sum kind of contract where there's an agreed upon price and agreed upon services, and the consultant works as hard as they can to deliver those services, and if they deliver those services more efficiently, they still keep the same amount. In a time and material contract, you're paying on an hour-by-hour, cost-by-cost basis. So that not-to-exceed amount is only a not-to-exceed amount. You will pay what is worked. And if that is less than the not-to-exceed amount, then that is what it will be. You also saw, I'm certain, a whole bunch of federal terms and references to laws that may not be applicable. Most are not. Clean Air Act, anti-bird, wide variety. They're in there for a reason. They are the federal compliance terms. When an auditor comes, they're going to set aside the agreements on one side and the federal terms on the other, and they're going to compare. And if they're missing, it's just easier not to have to explain why it's missing. You just put them in.
Gina.
Yes,
Commissioner
please.
Hall
I'm
has
sorry.
a question for you. Commissioner Hall?
Oh, sorry.
Hi, thank you. Just to return back to time and materials. So yeah. With the project scope that you have, the project plan, timeline, resources, so I assume you have a notional burn rate. Is there some point where we'll check quarterly or semi-annually to make sure that, looking at whether we're ahead or behind on the burn rate, so we don't get 100% through the project timeline, but then we exhausted our, we hit our not to exceed point at 75% of that time, trying to avoid that.
Yeah, that's my job as your project manager. You will receive monthly invoices. There will be an accounting of how, within the tasks, of how the expenditure is going. It's my job to actively manage. You start a project like this of some scale with the notion going in, things change, the categories change. Funding spent a little more in here, a little more in there, but there's close communication. We will set up, when we have a proper internal kickoff meeting, we'll set up periodic reviews and staff meeting to keep track.
Thank you.
Gene, I have a question on.
Yes, please.
Since this is federally contracted, you have to follow the guidelines for wages. And I think in the contract it says anything overtime is paid 1.5 times. Are you expecting overtime?
No, that's related to construction and other kinds of employees. The schedule that's provided, the fee schedule that's provided, it's got each of 3 years and a series of titles. That's the fee schedule that you'll. So no overtime.
Just wanted to get it out. I'm just reading it, so I just wanted to get it out there. So
Yep.
Thank you.
It's good question. The contract, per your request for proposal, is a 1-year term with 2 1-year renewal options. So hopefully you like the job we're doing. But in a year, you get a crack at it. Insurance, we will provide an additional insured certificate. Our limits are typically larger than professional services because we do engineering, we do construction work. So the limits are pretty generous, but the county will be listed as an additional insured. And just a fine point on the law firms with Baker Donaldson and BMB, those will have separate agreements to allow the county to be the client, managed through the Tetra Tech contract. So Tetra Tech is not in the way of the attorney-client relationship, so that the firms are not advising Tetra Tech, they are advising the county. So that's an important component so that you're getting that representation. Our budget, again, the time and materials, so that not to exceed amount is $1.337 million. It may seem like a lot. I will let you know within the federal compliance and federal funding management space across the country, and this is true for FEMA, CDBG, and also we're seeing this in COVID, CARES Act, as well as ARPA. Those services tend to run between 5 and 7% of an allocation amount. The amount that we've provided here, we really took a sharp pencil to being responsible, we felt, to the compliance responsibilities, but also really trying to provide value. That fee is 3.8%, and we feel real proud of that. We think we've got a lean team, and we think we've got good services and efficiencies to offer the county. We've also incorporated a few additions that others perhaps haven't. One of the components of the plan, the strategic plan, the planning process that I talked about, will have a funding matrix. So not only SLFRF funding, but explore other resources that might augment your allocation. As generous as it is, you can always use more. And leveraging other sources and thinking about other sources and how to pursue those is great. So we think we're providing some real value here, and we hope you do as well. Those funds are paid out of the allocation, so this is not general fund funding from the county. This is part of the allocation that you've received. And in terms of burn rate and how we see the contract rolling out, certainly within the first year, significant activity, kind of undertaking those dual planning and compliance, as well as really getting implementation and program startup underway. So it's heavily weighted towards the first year. The second year is more monitoring and compliance, and that third year it comes back up a little bit for closeout activities. And then in terms of the next steps, just that recap of we'll come before you again with a presentation on the state and local financial recovery funding, and we'll get to work pretty quick with compliance review starting and some work on the planning process, get that up and running. What questions can I answer? What other questions can I answer?
Any questions for Gina? Wow, great job.
Why, thank you. We hope so.
Move this forth to the business section. 6 up, 1 other. Move it forth. Okay. The ARPA recipient standard, next online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Gina. Gina, if you want to stand by for this next item, you don't have to literally stand by, but I mean just be close by. And Susan Durham, Susan, if you want to come on down the table, or if you need to address this item, and I'll tee it up a little bit. You're all aware that the U.S. Treasury issued its final rule with respect to the American Rescue Plan Act on the 6th of January. Nobody knew when it was coming. The interim rule was issued in May of last year. There was a review period that lasted into July, and then it kind of they went away, and we had the interim final rule in place, and that was essentially the guiding light until the final rule came out 2 weeks ago. And a provision of the final rule, which is different from the interim final rule, has to do with the amount of funding a local government recipient can use for lost revenue recovery. You may recall, I know Commissioner Angel recalls because he learned this at NACO, the interim final rule said that local governments could claim 4% of the total grant for revenue loss recovery. And that was believed to be the law of the land until just recently. And the final rule has changed that to create what they're calling a standard allocation of $10 million. And basically, governments that have received that amount, and even those that don't receive $10 million, they could use their entire allocation now for revenue loss recovery. And why is it on the agenda? The reason it's on the agenda is Susan Durham, as our agent, needs to file a report by the 31st of January. And that report has to indicate whether the county wishes to utilize $10 million of its total grant from ARPA for this standard allocation for revenue loss. And so we felt that because this is our last meeting this month, it's the only opportunity to get an action on it so that Susan can report. Conferred with Craig this morning, and we quickly added it to the agenda. We have a motion here drafted for your consideration, which I'll pass out. And I'd invite Susan, if you want to address Levy Court further on this, you're more familiar with what reporting requirements are with respect to this item, and while I pass this out.
Good evening. I don't know if any of you have any questions yet, but basically to reiterate what Mike just said is that this change is a last minute set up in the final rule. I think it was January 9th when the final rule came out. And when they changed this, it's lost revenue deduction that you can take. In the beginning, as Mike alluded to, it was 4.1%. They just revamped that to 5.2, or you can take up to $10 million as a one-time election. That's our two choices. And the interesting part to it is that this relieves you of some of the reporting restrictions anyhow of the rest of the money. You have to use it for government services. So it's related to what you already do, and you'll have plenty of needs and uses for that, so that'll not be a problem. But it does free you up on, it's a little less restrictive as far as reporting and tracking and all that. It's money you'll be able to give out a little quicker. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I'll just be honest with you, you know how I am. So I strongly recommend this. You get this one-time chance, and once you elect one or the other, you can't go back and change your mind. It's one or the other. Or you could choose nothing for your revenue loss. So, anybody have any questions?
Commissioner Buxton and President Pepper.
Thank you, Mr. Orms. Thanks for taking my call today and explain a little bit about what's going on. I necessity to make a decision tonight. Not a big fan of these types of actions, but sometimes it happens. It is what it is. So I'm prepared to support the action. Maybe just a general thought, or not even a thought, a question. Maybe the obvious. Do you think the change was designed to create the flexibility?
I really do. I think it was to help the little guy, the little governments that had less, 10 million or less, not have to jump through all those other hoops and be able to handle this money and use it for a good purpose.
The question maybe not, well, maybe for you, maybe for the group. How does this relate to Tetra and the actions that they do? They still commingle?
Yes, it's just less, let's see. I mean, they'll still be involved, giving us some guidance when needed. If we needed any guidance on it, it just won't require as much of the planning documents, and Gina can correct me if she disagrees with this, and everything that's being demanded for the use of the rest of the federal funding. It's really guided more by our guidelines, and I mean, you have to be compliant with federal, but, you know, Gina, you can allude to that if you feel differently. Or
we would support the compliance.
Gina, you're going to have to use the mic. We can't hear you.
Projecting. We would support the county, of course, in reviewing compliance documentation of the expenditure. The category of expenditure county government services is very wide, so it offers you a lot of flexibility for how you can use the funds. But I kind of describe it as putting brackets around it. You know, you have a broad category within that, but it's got some brackets. But it's a good option. It was really kind of sprung on the nation. It was an attempt to offer flexibility. Sometimes when flexibility is offered, it makes it a little harder for folks. So it's kind of creating this circumstance where it's All right. If you want to exercise the option, it's probably prudent to take an action this evening. So, good, bad, or indifferent, that's what U.S. Treasury offered.
Okay.
I did look at a webinar with NACO, and they're very highly in favor of this election and are very happy to see it. So I did do that yesterday.
I'll be honest, from what I understand, it seems like it makes sense and it'll be useful. And I want the folks to understand, Gina, I appreciate you being here. Mr. Esposito, Mr. Pardee, my failure to act isn't a reflection on your services or your qualifications. By no means at all. It's a personal reflection on me. And what I'd like to see, that's a fairly substantive packet. Right or wrong, I don't own the county. Of course I don't. I've been told that many times. I don't always have to get my way, but I do own my vote, and I do offer the opportunity to offer an opinion. I'm not going to share that tonight, but I will share it with you down the road on some thoughts and maybe some better understanding. But I am not prepared to listen to a presentation and then act on that 10 minutes later. That's it. All right? But thank you. I'm confident you'll be fine without me.
President Pepper?
If you take the $10 million, are we able to use part of that money to help other municipalities who may not have received enough ARPA funds to do some kind of project, or what are we allowed to use that for specifically?
Do you have anything in mind, or I can respond?
You can respond.
Okay. We're very soon going to be finishing each other's sentences. The parameters around the funds are county government services. We read there's a little ambiguity, I guess I would say, in the way that the language is written around the rules. So I'm going to try and make this succinct rather than a dissertation on the interim and final rules. We do read the rules as permissible, that if the county wished to support a municipality, it could. We would probably want to double back with U.S. Treasury and ask this question, because there's not bright line language that says that you can, and there's not bright line language that says that you can't. That said, as well, the state of Delaware also received, every state in the union and territories received 2 buckets of funds. Ones that it can use for the state itself, and it may provide to state agencies and others, and another for small municipalities that haven't received their own allocation. So there's another source that if you're thinking of a particular municipality that hadn't received its own allocation, there's that source there too. So there need to be some coordination and understanding of where the state is in providing those resources to those municipalities.
Thank you. Next question for the county administrator. Have you done any, not that it matters what others do, but it's always nice to know. Have you done any polling to see what any of the municipalities may do with this, or any of the other counties in the state?
Thank you, Mr. President. The only jurisdiction I'm aware of that's made a determination that I'm aware of on this subject was Sussex County, and they've elected to reserve the $10 million for their purposes as revenue loss reduction. Beyond that, I haven't canvassed Dover or any. Actually, for example, Dover received less than $10 million, so they could, and probably will, I would imagine, put all of that they are earmarked to receive into this standard allocation. I would imagine, to give their flexibility that they otherwise would not have. but I didn't check.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, sir. So, for either of you in the tag team, this sets up $10 million for the county's use. What happens if we only use $5 million of it? Does it, that other $5 million we're able to use elsewhere, or is that something we have to return? Because I don't think we've really looked at our revenue to see how across the expanse of all of our expenses where we've been impacted.
Well, I can say that you will have no problem using the 10 million. So I can speak to that before Gina can. She can take that from there. But
good enough. Thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, move forth to the business meeting. 7 up. Thank you both. Any public comments on these two items?
Do we have any guests on WebEx that wish to address Levy Court on any of these, either of these two topics? *3 on your mobile phone or the raise hand icon on your computer.
I see no hands raised on WebEx at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll reconvene the business meeting. Under old business, we have one item under Mrs. Maston. Item tabled on December 21st, 2021.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm making a motion to lift application CS 2109-FPS Cedar Creek Solar Farm from the table for discussion.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Maston, second by Commissioner Sweeney. A roll call, please, on the motion.
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals the item has been lifted from the table for discussion purposes.
Ms. Maston?
Does any commissioners have any comments?
Yes, Ms. Maston, I would like to, please. Well, first of all, I want to say that this has been a heck of a learning experience for me. I don't know about you all, but tonight, before we vote on the issue of solar farms, I would like to bring forth some facts, information, and policies for us to look at. I'm not against solar. I'm not in favor of pristine farmland being removed from the table, especially outside the growth zone. I thought about our public adequate facilities ordinance, which does not deal with the loss of farmland, because the farmer's land is assessed by the State Farmland Evaluation Advisory Committee, which basically assessed a lower tax of his property, which helps the farmer financially. So, farmland and agriculture use, however, if a change in land occurs, then such land shall be subject to a rollback tax for 10 years, tax years, immediately preceding in which the land has value assessed in tax. Assessment procedures, subsection 8335, sections D1, 2B, D, and C. Number 3, rollback taxes as provided herein shall become payable when the land is applied to use other than agriculture. And 3C, the approval of a site plan or issuance of a certificate of occupancy which allows for non-agricultural usage. 3D, loss of eligibility. 8330-8337. Rollback taxes hereunder shall be paid within 90 days their due date. Comprehensive plan has been certified by the state, signed by the governor. This is our guideline and our roadmap. Progress in agriculture preservation, page 5-13, number 3, seeks to preserve and enhance wildlife habitat, promotes retention of farmland and farmland in Kent County, strengthens agricultural section in Kent County. Number 3, direct development to areas where infrastructure exists or planned in order to encourage agriculture and maintain current quality of life. Protection of rural character is dependent upon our ability to encourage and protect agriculture uses, public workshops, indicate this issue as a major priority, as on page 7-4. Pages 5-14, number 17, review and reverse permitted uses in agriculture conservation and agriculture residential zoning districts to better reflect current agricultural practices and business. Page 17-13, recommendations. Number 4, create a new agricultural zoning district available to properties outside the growth zone overlay district in order to permit a by right use that supports agricultural and are reasonable and expected in the rural areas. Number 6, develop in areas where adequate infrastructure and public services while protecting the natural resources and rural character of the county. The Delaware Historical Office have data on the file of the house dated there since 1968 and 1980s. The area had Native American artifacts found. A high potential of a possible burial ground could be due to the fact people buried their family on their property during those times. But additional research would be needed. And we also amended the law for looking up old burial sites, Chapter 7, 45, I believe, or 54. So that's been taken care of because what happened with the Frederica overpass, they found burial sites when they put that overpass in. Commissioners, this is not a simple land use or farm issue. It's a complex one, mainly due to a topic in our ordinance, utilities. That wasn't even thought of when it was written, and with all the issues I brought forth tonight. Having said that, I believe Levy Court should entertain pooling utilities and have it as a standalone, again, tabling it, so that we can have a workable document where we are all on the same page, in the same book, at the same time. What else is going to come up before us? Let's do our homework and do it right. That's why I proposed that we table it again on the solar. Now, having said that, I know we can't have any dialogue. We're finished, but this is why I have to vote the way I have to, because of research that I've done based on this, because we didn't know any of this. This is all new. This is since the last time we met. And we keep meeting each time and learning something new each time. So that's why I want to say this. That's why I wanted to bring it forth. Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments?
Mr. Mass. Mr. Mass. One of the things that's just cropped up here recently, Dover Air Force Base has instituted and developed a study group to study the area around Dover Air Force Base. And part of that study area goes all the way up to Lipstick and that area. They're trying to determine what are the proper land uses for their mission, something to not compete with their mission. So that's something that has just come off the table in the papers a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago, I believe. But that's come up since the last hearing, and that's something I think we really ought to take a look at and really see where Dover Air Force Base is and what their concerns are in the area around the Air Force Base. And you know, of course, I think the basic premise of zoning is to separate incompatible uses. So, you know, are we saying that this is compatible with tourism, agriculture, aquaculture, and residential? I don't think so. So.
Any other comments? Commissioner Hall?
Thanks, Commissioner Maston. I've talked to a number of the neighbors out there. I talked to the State Historic Preservation Office, talked to legal counsel, read the comprehensive plan, and I don't disagree with Commissioner Angel that we have learned a lot and are finding a lot. I think at the end of the day, my concern is that, for instance, with the State Historic Preservation Office, they don't have a formal review unless there's a federal component to an application. So Their advice to just caution the applicant that if human remains are found, that there's a process to notify the appropriate agency and take the appropriate action. But there's nothing that they can do to stop this. They just have advice. And whereas we have the comprehensive plan, and I read that very language that you mentioned tonight because it concerned me. And I believe that if we have a fault, it's that we have the need to update the agricultural conservation, the AC zoning, to strip out landfills and public utilities, because I believe that's inconsistent with the idea of conservation. But at the end of the day, the applicant put in an application under the rules that were in place on that day. And to then try to rewrite policy or update policy or create new policy and then subject them to policy that was not in place when the application was made, I believe is inappropriate, maybe even illegal. So I think we should move ahead. I think the application should be reviewed just for what it is, which is a conditional use for a permitted use, and that zoning for that particular parcel. And so to me, that's the only lens that we can look at this through. So thanks for my time.
Commissioner Howell?
Well, a month or two ago when we approved a solar farm out in Hartley, it didn't get this kind of scrutiny, and I'm just kind of wondering why. Secondly, one of the dates that Commissioner Angel mentioned was 1968. So are we going to go by antiquated rules when, to make a decision this year? That is highly questionable because, solar energy didn't even exist then, if I'm not mistaken. So my position is the same as it's always been.
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Angel?
Well, first to Mr. Hall. The 2018 comp plan, which was certified by the state and the governor, is a rule we need to follow. That's our roadmap too. Now, when I always was told, state and federal always supersede the county, so that's why I brought it forth. As for Commissioner Howell, 1968, that was the first time that they had recorded something, and then they did something in the 1980s. But that's all predicated on the people that lived there in the 1700s and 1800s, before we had laws, rules, regulations for burial and other things too. And the tribes that lived on that area worked that area because of the river. So there's been artifacts found, and more studies have to be done and research and stuff, as I said. But that's why I brought it forth, and that's why Chapter 7, I think 54 of the burial, when you find something, it supersedes anything, and you have to turn it in right away because of what happened with the Federica overpass. That's why I wanted to bring it forth. Thank you.
Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Pepper, I assume we take a vote to lift it from the
needs to
table?
make a motion.
Excuse me, I did make the motion to lift
Did
it
make
from
the
the
motion
table.
to lift it off the table for purpose of discussion.
Yes, sir.
Discussion.
Okay,
So need to make
I'd like to
another
make
motion.
an official motion to lift application CS 2109 FPS Cedar Creek Solar from the table.
We've already done that. We need a motion to either approve it or not approve it now.
I'll get this right in 4 years, maybe. I'd like to make a motion to deny lifting.
No.
To deny the application. Jesus God Almighty. I'd like to make a motion to deny application CS 2109 FPS Cedar Creek Solar Project.
Second motion.
Got a motion by Commissioner Maston to deny, second by Commissioner Angel. Any questions on the motion before we take a roll call? Seeing none, Ms. Naka, can I take a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
No.
Mr. Hall?
No, per RPC recommendations, staff recommendations, and my comments earlier.
Mr. Howell?
No.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
No.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 3 yeas, 4 nay.
Thank you. The motion fails for lack of adequate votes. We'll need another motion.
Move to approve application CS 21-0009 FPS Cedar Creek Solar based on Regional Planning Committee recommendation of approval, staff recommendation of approval, as well as the applicant has self-imposed conditions that meet many of the issues that were brought up during the previous 2 meetings we've had with the previous application as well as this one, in order to increase the buffer of vegetation around the property, reduction of the original acreage for use, the agreement to maintain funds to restore the land back to the original state after the life of the panels is over, and agreeing to work with Delaware agencies to allow hunting on the unused area of the property.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Sweeney, seconded by Commissioner Howell. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
No.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes, and I will explain my vote rather quickly. No, you're right, Commissioner Angel, this hasn't been fun, but many of these are not fun. And I certainly get it over the years that I've been here. I've learned that it is what it is. If you don't want to make the call, then get out of the chair. Yes to changing the laws that both you and Commissioner Hall have reached out and said. In fact, I would encourage us to do what we should have done a month ago or a couple weeks ago, which is to get going on those ordinances that are sitting there right now, ready to be acted on. In fact, we walked away from a moratorium because we were going to act on those ordinances until we didn't. So yes to what you say there. Yes to Mr. Pepper's concerns over the airbase. I have those concerns also, and in fact, if that's articulated as a concern, then moving forward, we need to have that presented. This is going to come off shallow. I'm going to say it anyway to the Goldsboroughs. My apologies. I understand where you are. I understand that you're not going to be happy or excited at all with the decisions that I'm making. I'm not asking you to accept my apologies, but I'm going to state it for the record. And moving forward, I hope that we can work out some agreements which do just that. Put these things in the right locations. I do believe the application has done everything that it can within its power to place it in a sort of benign way with screening and everything that you could ask for in this second application. So that I give them exceptional credit for that. They should be commended for that. They shouldn't be demonized. The project accessed the land use application system that commissioners current and previous put in place. They shouldn't be faulted for that. I mean, they just shouldn't. I believe that we have a situation tonight where, given the existing land use laws that we have in place, that we have to value each individual property owner's rights on both sides and then do the best we can to make a decision, which is what I'm currently doing tonight. At least in where I think I need to be. Not where I said I'd like to be. This is not where I'd like to be. This is where I think I have to be. This is where I know I have to be. So those are my comments. Those are my statements that go along with my vote to approve the application. Thank you.
Mr. Hall?
Before I vote, I do want to say, because I spoke to the Goldsboroughs a couple of times, they raised some excellent points, and for the entire community out there, I want to say that the concerns, issues, objections, thoughts should all be mirrored in a better policy than we have today. There's no doubt about it. And if I'm called to testify, I'll deny that I'm about to say that I look for every reason to deny this that I could, because I understand exactly what the impact is. But I went back to a 2018 court decision, Coker versus Kent County Levy Court. And the judge found for Kent County in that decision because it denied an application because the applicant would not agree to the conditions set on the property. But that is not what's going on here. They have agreed to everything that Levy Court has asked and a little bit more. And so from the lens of property rights and from looking at it that the only stand that Levy Court has to deny this application would be as if they would not conform to the conditions, then I have to vote in favor of this, and that's the reasons why I am. But again, like I said, I appreciate all the input, and we'll do a better job with a better policy. Thank you.
Mr. Howell.
Yes, surprise, surprise, but I vote yes. I liked what Commissioner Buxton said about property rights. Liked what Commissioner Hall said, quoting that decision from way back. Had a lot of wisdom to it, so I vote yes, and that's it.
Mrs. Maston?
No.
Mr. Sweeney?
We heard a lot of testimony concerning climate change, whether or not it was real or not. We heard a lot of testimony about solar farms and how much or whether or not they damage the environment more than they protect the environment. None of those were the issues that we had to face. As you heard from Commissioner Hall, this was simply whether or not a solar farm is allowable by ordinance at this location or under conditional use, and it is. If we could classify solar farms as industrial, it would have required a zoning change, but my conclusion is that solar farms are not industrial. Industry is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as an activity concerning the processing of raw materials and manufacturing of goods in factories. Factories produce traffic, noise, odors, they have buildings and lighting. Solar farm doesn't produce any of these. In fact, if all of these were considered, a farm would be considered industrial. We were told that the installation of the solar farm is going to impact the Atlantic Flyway for migrating fowl. From Canada to the Gulf Coast, there are 18 states that comprise almost 325 million acres of land. This 230 acres is not going to have an impact on the 325 million acres of the Atlantic Flyway. In the first application for this, I voted no, but I did not consider the conditions that we could place on the applicant. Those considerations and those conditions are now self-imposed, and I think it's a good, the second application was a good faith effort to mitigate a lot of the issues that the families and owners of farms around this property came up. So based on my earlier motion plus those comments, my vote's yes.
Mr. Pepper.
Well, as I stated before, the basic premise of our zoning is to separate incompatible uses, and I don't think this is compatible with the area. And I think it's a mistake on Levy Court's part to approve this. Just 25 years from now, when this piece of property is supposed to be put back into pristine condition, I doubt if I'll be here, and I'm sure that Commissioner Bannon will still be here, but so I just wish I could be here to look back and say I told you so. And and the other thing too is property rights. That's a funny concept. I mean, most people say they believe in property rights unless it affects their property, and then all of a sudden they're against it. So that has nothing to do with my vote, but I just wanted to bring that up. people want to be able to do what they want to do with their own land, but they don't want their neighbors to do what their neighbors want to do with their land. So, like I said, property rights is a funny concept. But I vote no.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 4 yeas and 3 nay.
Thank you. Mr. County Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for not bringing this up before the motion was cast and the vote was underway. But I just wanted to ask, is because it wasn't addressed in the motion, there were waivers requested with this application. There were waivers from wetland setbacks, and there were waivers from tree planting requirements. The staff recommended denial of them, but I don't think the motion captured a position on the waivers.
Yeah, so there were 2 waivers. One was for the setbacks from, but that included the ditch. Or it was just the ditch. It wasn't the wetlands from the river, I believe. Is Sarah here?
And while she's approaching, if you look at page 5 of your report, you'll see what I'm talking about. There were waivers described in the report that were requested. The staff recommended denial of them. It, in my opinion, is not real clear with the motion whether you acted on them or not separately.
I would agree with the county administrator. It's not clear if the levy court chose to grant or deny. Staff did recommend denial. The planning commission recommended denial of them all with the exception of that ditch. That is the one the planning commission recommended be granted. So it wouldn't be, the development wouldn't be encroaching on any wetland setback, but it would be the ditch setback. So again, planning commission recommended approval of that waiver, denial of the balance of them, and as the plan is currently designed, it meets all of the criteria with the exception of that ditch. Happy to answer any questions.
So as the plan is currently designed, it meets the waivers that were not granted.
It meets the standard the code sets.
Right.
So the way it's designed, the waiver from tree planting isn't required. There's no waiver from wetland. They're compliant with everything.
Okay, other than
It's just the ditch.
The ditch. So how do, Mr. Eliason, how do we move forward to include the waiver for the ditch buffer to be included in the motion?
I would consider a secondary motion clarifying that, and the issue comes up to me because the staff recommendation is a little bit different than what the RPC did.
Right.
And in the motion, in your motion, you talked about both the staff and
The RPC.
and the RPC. And I think because of that, I agree with the county administrator and the planning director that should be clarified. And I suggest it be done so in a new motion.
Okay, so this application's been around since September. It's not like we didn't have enough time to put a motion together to cover all this. There was also a request for the applicant to do soil testing on a regular basis, at least every 5 years, to determine whether or not. So do you want to include that in a secondary motion, Mr. Buxton?
Procedurally correct thing. However, if there's a seconding and then comments, I plan on reading in a secondary motion related to, or addition related to soil testing. Yes, I can do it now. I can do it under discussion. I don't know which one would be the most appropriate.
Whether I make the motion and we include it in me, or you make the motion for the ditch buffer and not the other waivers and include that in your motion, and I'll second it.
So if we're allowed to discuss briefly at this time, the motion, essentially the addition to the approval for the application, somewhat addresses concerns that have been raised over time, like the one Mr. Pepper raised here earlier, that there's a potential for leaching. There's a potential for the soils to be diminished or negatively impacted to the point where, well, they shouldn't be negatively impacted at all, but negatively impacted to the point where you can't utilize them in 25, 30 years. So I'd like to include in the motion, the amendment, the motion amended, that a soil study establishing the presence of any contaminants. So you establish a baseline of contaminants. That's the answer to, what are we looking for? You establish a baseline of contaminants. Okay, once you've done that, prior to construction and then every 5 years thereafter, contaminants that are found can be related to the solar facility. The source shall be identified and immediately mitigated. The summary of each soil studies shall be submitted to the county and a full report kept by the applicant and available for review by the county. I don't want to overcook this. This is not complicated. We're going to take a look at what's in the soils. We're going to take another look in 5 years, then 10 years. What I've learned is that without proper maintenance, at least in an email that I got from a quote group who's advocating for solar, when I asked about soil testing, if a proper maintenance occurs, you shouldn't have any leaching. Well, that sends a signal to me. We're not going to go out there and inspect, and we're not going to maintain, but we can certainly determine that the soil is being diminished. Anyway, that was a long-winded approach to say, I'll hand this off to you, Mr. Sweeney.
Mr. Sweeney,
go ahead.
If I could just suggest, just to make it clear, I would suggest that you are denying all the originally requested waivers from wetland setbacks with the exception of the setbacks from the ditch that was described. And you're also denying the waiver requested from the required tree plantings. And I think that makes it real clear that those waivers have been denied.
All right, so I make a secondary motion along with the approval of application CS 29-09 FPS Cedar Creek Solar to require initial soil testing to establish baseline contaminants in the soil, and thereafter every 5 years with a report submitted to the county, as well as denying all waivers requested except for the ditch setback request and the and that's it.
Second.
Motion, or secondary motion, was made by Commissioner Sweeney, second by Commissioner Buxton. Anybody have any questions before we take the roll call on that? Mr. Angel.
For legal counsel.
Sorry to interrupt.
Because I voted no on this project. By voting for what the denial from what's being asked is separate, correct? It has nothing to do with anything I voted for previous for.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Naka.
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes, for staff and RPC recommendations.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, per advice of the county administrator and the county counselor.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals the secondary motion has been approved. Now can I close the first motion? The first motion, application CS 2109 FPS Cedar Creek Solar has been approved. Next item, Commissioner Angel, application SL-11-01.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Kiefer.
Thank you, Commissioners. The next item before you is a revision to the planned unit development for the villages at Nobles Pond. This addresses phases 3A and 4A. There are a number of duplex units within those two phases, and the developer has asked for reconsideration of the concept plan to allow those duplex units to be converted to small single-family units with a minimum 5-foot side setback. It should be noted that the developer actually made the same request in the first phase of the subdivision, exact same request to convert duplexes to small singles with 5-foot side yard setbacks. And the Levy Court approved that in May of 2014. So it's an identical request. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. This will simply change the concept plan. The layout of the project doesn't change at all. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Sarah? I have one, Sarah.
Sure.
Since we're going from a duplex to single family, 5 foot's not a lot of space in between for fire. With at least a duplex, you have fire protection built in between. Is there any concern because of the 5 foot in between for single homes, that there's not a lot of space and a fire can continually go down the line?
Fire Marshal has expressed no concern. And again, this is what's been built in phase 1 without incident. So.
Okay, I just want to get it on record.
Yep.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sweeney.
Thanks, sir. Sarah, is this, in your opinion, is this an economical thing for them to do? Is that why there's more requests for single-family homes than duplexes?
It's market demand. I've heard from a number of developers that they have trouble, at least in this market in Kent County, selling attached houses.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Commissioner Angel.
Well, based on the fire marshal, what he said, I move that the Levy Court approve the request to allow single-family detached dwellings to be constructed on the approved duplex lots in phases 3A and 4A, and with a 5-foot minimum side setbacks. This will have a no negative impact to the development and enable housing type flexibility with the remaining duplex lots.
Second?
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Angel, second by Commissioner Masson to approve SL-11-01 revisions. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Application SL-11-01 revisions have been approved for Nobles Pond phases 3A and 4A. Okay, new business. Mr. Angel.
Thank you. Any further questions for this, Mr. Petimage?
Commissioner Angel, just based on some of the earlier discussion, if you choose to use the motion that's provided, I would suggest that you add a few words to the last sentence where it says, and direct the president of Levy Court to execute said agreement. I would add, and associated law firm agreements on behalf of Kent County Levy Court.
Any further questions? I move to approve the professional services agreement with Tetra Tech Incorporated as presented this evening and authorize it and direct the President of Levy Court to execute said agreement on behalf of Kent County Levy Court and the associate law firm for agreement.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes, I lost place on where we are.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals the motion passed. Item number 2, Mr. Angel.
Thank you. Any further questions for this one? I move to designate $10 million of the Kent County American Rescue Plan Act allocation as the county's standard allowance for revenue loss in accordance with the provisions of the United States Department of Treasury. Final rule on the utilization of the COVID state and local fiscal recovery funds.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Angel, second by Commissioner Sweeney. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have roll call on item number 2?
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
It's a gypsy court for me. I'm just going to say it clear. I wasn't paying attention. I was reading an action that's happening in Magnolia. I would like the record to reflect, if possible, that I did not support action item number 1, that I do support number 2. So yes to this motion.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals the motion passed. Thank you, folks. Good to see you.
Thank you so much.
New business. Action items from January 18th, 2022, committee meetings. Commissioner Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. President. So if you remember, Mr. Stein was here to offer $20,000 for land within the Chaseland Hill subdivision that was set aside by the developer for the county library, an expansion county library, and we have, as a county, have not moved in that direction. He's offered $20,000 to pay us for that. So I believe I have a formal motion. Is that correct? Yes. You got to find it. Can I see yours? Computer. I move to accept and approve the offer submitted by Magnolia Land Development LLC to purchase the 2 acres plus or minus parcel of land currently owned by Kent County Levy Court, located within the Chaseland Hill subdivision for the lump sum price of $20,000, and further move that the proceeds from this land shall be deposited in the Parkland Reserve Fund for future use to improve and or expand county parks.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Sweeney, second by Commissioner Maston to approve. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Maston?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepper?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 7 yeas.
Thank you. Roll call reveals the motion passed. Item number 2, Commissioner Maston.
Yes, in a prior meeting, I believe we all remember that Mayor Steve Bilbrough from the town of Wyoming was here to present a plan for Wyoming for a playground that would be able to be utilized by all children, regardless of what their handicaps were or how well they could perform. So based on that, which I thought of the Levy Court office, a copy of the signed construction contract to build the inclusive playground as described and presented.
So this $100,000 is really high for this project. For any projects that are coming from the community.